this as well. I believe he's joining us from Thailand, and I think it's his first time joining us. Is that correct, Thomas?
That's correct.
Oh, well, welcome to our Sangha. I'm glad you were able to connect. And
yeah.
is it correct you're about 12 hours in front of us?
That's correct. I was thinking it was 13, but that was...
Well, yeah, you're probably right. I was just, that was kind of a...
No, I came an hour early.
Well, I'm glad you were able to connect this. The electronics are a wonderful thing for sharing the Dhamma.
Yeah.
Do you understand where we are tonight, that this is the beginning of a 12-week study?
I gathered that from the note on your website.
Okay, so this is the first of 12 classes of a Dhamma study based on my book called The Truth of Happiness, which is it's a basic, but it's a complete primer to what the Buddha actually taught. So you're joining us on an auspicious night. So, and if you have any questions or you're a little bit confused, just send me an email when you can, and we'll set up a time to talk and get you going in the right direction. But I'm glad you could join us today.
Okay, thank you.
You'll have a chance to ask some questions after I give my talk.
Okay.
So tonight is the first Tuesday class of our 12-week study. The Saturday and Tuesday classes are the same. And so how many of you, I'm sure all of you, but you all did your homework? I'm going to ask it this way, because I always ask who did their homework, and everybody raise their hand. But let me just put it this way. Who didn't do their homework? No, but you don't have to raise your hand. Just so I know. And to get the most out of this course, it's best to do that little bit of homework and do your reading. But here we go. So, and I'm not going to read the entire preface, introduction, or the first chapter on Jhana Meditation, but I'm going to read a good portion of it. And I mentioned this on Saturday. The Truth of Happiness book was the first book on Buddhism that I ever published, but it was actually meant to be the second book, and it was meant to be a study guide to the larger volume, Becoming Buddha, Becoming Awakened. But there were some circumstances that took place that caused me to publish the book first, and actually it was put into a pamphlet first to teach a course at Hunterdon Medical Center. And so this course that we're taking now, most of you have taken it more than once. Some of you, this will be your first time. But it is just what I described to Thomas. It's a very basic, fundamental introduction, but also a complete foundation to the Buddha's Dhamma. So let's get started. In the Simsapa Sutta, the Buddha describes the purpose of his teachings. And what have I taught? I teach the nature of dukkha, meaning the nature of stress and suffering. I teach the origination of that dukkha, of that suffering, which is craving and clinging that originates dukkha. And it's craving and clinging ultimately for fabricated or fake views of ourself in relation to the world. We just went through that 35-week study of Vipassana, and that's where the Dhamma resides and resolves in, isn't it? In understanding the nature of self in relation to the world. That's the profound understanding that Siddhartha Gautama awakened to in what he spent 45 years teaching. To some, that would seem like, who cares? It should be such an obvious thing. I know who I am, and I know what the world is. I've been living in it, in my case, for 64 years. But the problem is we don't understand it. We don't understand the nature of self in relation to the world, and because of that, we create confusion, delusion, and ongoing stress and suffering, ongoing disappointing experiences. The Buddha continues, I teach that cessation of dukkha, and dukkha in this case is synonymous with ignorance of Four Noble Truths. I teach the cessation of dukkha is possible. That's the most important thing that an awakened human being ever taught, because if he taught that, guess what, I found out that the cessation of dukkha isn't possible, we're all wasting our time, aren't we? But he did understand it. He came to a profound understanding of an individual's contribution to their own confusion and deluded thinking. I teach that cessation of dukkha is possible, and furthermore, I teach that the Eightfold Path is the path leading to the cessation of dukkha, of suffering. This is what I have taught. Just from that one opening stanza to this sutta, we understand everything that the Buddha taught. The purpose and the scope of his Dhamma is there, and it's nothing else. But that's everything, isn't it? And why have I taught these things? The Buddha asks that rhetorical question. Because they are connected with the goal. And what is the goal? Well, we'll find out. They relate to the rudiments of a mindful life. The rudiments of a mindful life. I refer to that as refined mindfulness. It's not just this constant grasping after mindfulness of making sure my mind is in the present moment. It's mindfulness that holds in mind the principles of the Eightfold Path as our ongoing path to awakening. These teachings develop disenchantment, meaning disenchantment with fabricated views, disenchantment with the world, and dispassion. These teachings develop cessation of stress and unhappiness. The cessation, the ending of all stress and unhappiness. They bring calm and direct knowledge. These teachings develop self-awakening and unbinding. Unbinding from what? Unbinding from views rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. This is why I have taught them. So we know what he taught and the purpose of why he taught it. And that purpose is important to guide us. Why are we engaging in Dhamma practice? If the goal is the same, then we have the right practice. If we're looking for something else, if we're looking for magical or mystical teachings, if we're looking for escape from the world or escape from our own wrong views of self and the suffering that it brings us, we're in the wrong place. Because the Dhamma doesn't provide escape from anything. The Dhamma provides understanding of everything, meaning understanding of the self, of who I am in relation to the world I live in. And it's not just the Frenchtown world, it's the entire world that we develop understanding of. And it doesn't mean that we have knowledge of every single mundane thing in the world. In fact, it means we have a very specific but very focused knowledge that dismisses other things that aren't part of the Dhamma. This is what the Buddha is talking about. This is the goal, to understand who I am within the framework of the Eightfold Path. Period. There's nothing else that the Buddha taught. It said that he gave over 84,000 discourses, which just means 84,000 in mystical numbers simply means a hell of a lot. The Buddha gave a lot of teachings, but always on this same subject for 35 years. The Buddha continues, therefore your practice is contemplating and understanding. This is stress. This is the origination of stress. This is the cessation of stress. When the Buddha is talking about contemplating and understanding, he's talking about having a direct experience of stress, understanding what it is, and understanding, having a direct experience of the cessation of self-induced stress. Any questions so far? Your practice is contemplating and understanding. This is the path of practice leading to the cessation of stress. Again, how did we get such confusing Buddhist lineages and dharmas from this statement? Well, it's because we didn't read this statement. We built fabricated dharmas completely disregarding what the Buddha taught, or we could have never arrived at some of the speculative and magical dharmas that are so prevalent today. My words here. The Dhamma is often presented today as an impossible goal that will take limitless eons to achieve. For the first many number of years in my own Buddhist practice, every wonderful and sincere teacher I had, and I studied with some of the biggies, meaning well-known, and to a person they said that in one way or another, that here's the path to awakening, do these practices, do these rituals, do these different meditation practices, do these different mindfulness practices, and you really don't have a chance to awaken, but if you do, it's going to take endless eons. What is more cruel to tell someone who really wants to awaken that you don't have a chance, but you can do all these things? There's nothing more cruel than that. There's nothing that directly contradicts what the Buddha taught, which is that each and every human being holds the potential within them, no matter who and what they are, no matter what situation they might find themselves in. Each and every human being has a potential within them to awaken. And what is that potential? The same mind that is rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths is the same mind that awakens. How else could it be anything different? In fact, what the Buddha is teaching us is to take that mind that we fractured by our own views and our own thought patterns and bringing it back together and uniting that mind back into its body for the first time and keeping it there no matter what occurs. It's the essence of a calm and peaceful mind. Again, my words. This notion simply creates the notion of endless eons to awaken. This notion simply creates more confusion and develops a state of mind that is constantly grasping. Does everybody get that last line? When we engage in a Dhamma practice, that the ultimate goal is endless eons into the future, the only thing we can do is to establish a mind that's grasping after that goal, aren't we? The Buddha teaches over and over again, stop grasping and bring your mind back into your body, because that's where awakening resides. We've talked about this over and over again during our study and in other ways too. The series we did on the wisdom of restraint is exactly the same thing. We awaken with a mind united in the body in this present moment, not in the past and not in the future because of some merit we might have gained or endless rituals in the future. If I'm thinking about what I'm doing right now, that I'll get my reward in the future, there's nothing more speculative than that, isn't there? No matter how many people told me that, how many respected teachers, or no matter how many of my associations, meaning fellow lineage holders or Sangha members, agree to that, doesn't make it true. In fact, it just makes it even more cruel, because now it's more established in the modern Buddhist lexicon. When again, the Buddha taught something completely different. We all have the potential to awaken right here, right now, in this moment. My words. I came to see that much of my confusion was arising from the individual and culturally influenced adaptations and accommodations to the Buddha's original teachings. When I put aside the more esoteric, magical, and mystical teachings that developed after the Buddha's death and began to study the Buddha's direct teachings, these simple and profound teachings became understandable and entirely useful. And up until then, I spent many, many years studying Buddhism. I didn't understand one damn thing about it. But once I started studying the Buddha's words, and there's something interesting to me about this. Once I started studying the Buddha's words alone and stopped relying on outside translations and interpretations, then it started to make sense. And it took me a while to even understand that, what I was doing by focusing just on the Buddha's teaching, and it's why I teach, is because any of those other influences would have continued the distraction. They would have either told me that what I was studying was not the actual words of the Buddha, which is often how the Sutta Pitaka is presented, that the much more effective dharmas are ones that the Buddha taught while he was disincarnate and that appeared in the physical world hundreds and sometimes 600 or 700 years after the Buddha passed. And there's a legend about how that happened. Of course, those are the ones that, like the Lotus Sutra, the Heart Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, the Platform Sutra, and a few others, are what modern Buddhism rests on and refers to. Those of you that have been practicing modern Buddhism, that's likely what you've been studying. The Buddha didn't teach any of them. He couldn't possibly have taught any of them unless you believe the legend that is taught to justify these teachings, which often goes something like this, that while the Buddha was in human form, he left that human form, went to, and it's usually called Tulsita, Buddhist heaven, and there he taught disincarnate beings the Dhamma so that it was preserved by the Nagas. Nagas means the snake people, by the snake people until humanity was ready to actually hear these advanced teachings. It's quite a legend, isn't it? And if you're grasping after modern Buddhism, you'll eagerly grasp after and adopt that. That sounds reasonable. Because if my mind is rooted in speculative dharmas, I'll certainly grasp after one that presents itself that way. When I understood that, and this is why I say the things I say, I'm not calling my old teachers cruel. They were very sincere in doing the best they can. But in a general way, to teach something to someone who's looking for understanding that is only a further distraction is the essence of cruelty to me. And that's why we don't get into those things here. Yeah, let me see to read this too. So Buddhism adapted to various cultures within a framework of each culture's beliefs and held views. So when Buddhism first left northern India and southern Nepal, it went north first, up into Tibet, and then it turned south and came into China. That was one route, and it took root in China. And some of you may have heard of the Agamas. The Agamas are the Chinese version of the Sutta Pitaka, and some of that's pretty close to what is contained in the Sutta Pitaka. And then it was from China that it went to Japan and Korea. At the same time, Buddhism went south through Japan, through India, into Sri Lanka, and then through the rest of Southeast Asia that way. So that was two lineages of the Dhamma was already established during that cultural exposition. And so as it went through these different countries, it was also influenced by these different countries, much like any other religion that passed through different countries was. So we have Buddhist practices such as Tibetan Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism, Japanese Buddhism, Sri Lankan or forest, you've heard of the forest tradition, that's part of Southeast Asian tradition. And they all have their own quirks, but none of them have preserved the Buddhist teachings, because as soon as it left the Buddha's little enclave there and started traveling around the world, it was influenced by each and every culture it went to. And so that's what we have today. We have dharmas today that have very little resemblance to the Buddha, to what the Buddha taught, and they're very representative of the cultures that they're in. And because of that, and I won't get too deep into this, they've incorporated into their own form of dharma the problems inherent in that culture. Again, I won't get too deep into that, but that's what has happened. So that leads to this. I believe the difficulty that many Westerners have had in integrating the Dhamma, and why many Westerners keep adapting, accommodating, and embellishing it, and encouraged to do that, is in attempting to develop an understanding of the Dhamma from the perspective of an unfamiliar culture. In other words, when I was practicing Tibetan Buddhism, and I took my vows in a Tibetan lineage that the 16th Karmapa heads, we were expected to be Tibetan in our thinking. And really, in order to develop that type of Buddhism, you really had to think like a Tibetan, even though I had no idea what that meant. But that's how the Dhamma is presented. And the same thing with each culturally influenced Dhamma. We feel even more confused because of the cultural influence. And now we are trying to study it from the West, which has a very pragmatic view, which, by the way, is the best view to have with the Buddhist teaching. But when we try to incorporate a little bit of Chinese Buddhism, a little bit of Japanese Buddhism, a little bit of Vietnamese Buddhism, think Thich Nhat Hanh, and a little bit of Tibetan, think Dalai Lama or the Karmapa, and make this kind of amorphous soup out of all of them, what do we have? Nothing. We have a nice distracting practice, and I can consider myself an astute Buddhist because look at all these different things that I know. And now that was really my Buddhist practice. What's the Heinz 57 type of Buddhism? And I didn't know any. I was just every day I got more and more frustrated and more confused by all this esoteric knowledge that I thought was important, until I came across the Buddhist Dhamma and I could engage in a brain dump and get rid of it all, which is really what I did. I literally went through the process of recognizing and abandoning each of the conditioned thought structures that I thought Buddhism was. I had to look at them and let them go consciously in order to make room for what the Buddha actually taught. As Buddhism moved to the West with a much more pragmatic view of the world, many Westerners attempted to integrate the teachings and the cultural influences already present. With no perspective in which to understand the cultural influences, great confusion has arisen. This has led to the original teachings to be shrouded in mystery, hidden behind dogma and ritual, and lacking the context in which the original teachings were presented. In other words, it became more important to use something called Buddhism to further a culture than it was to have the actual Buddhist teachings influence the culture in a meaningful way. Culture and establishment became more important than what an awakened human being actually taught. But that's just human nature, isn't it? Human evolution has been influenced in just that same way by the cultures in which humans evolved in. Is that clear? So even things like novel government ideas are still effective. We had to talk about the parliamentary, the monarchy system. They're influenced by the culture they are. That's just the way human nature is. On a smaller scale, a family influences the way they see things, don't they? And that family tends to look at things the same way. On a larger scale, countries do the same thing and cultures do the same thing. And that's just what has happened. We're so fortunate, though, that the Dhamma that is completely free of any cultural influence is still available to us today. The Buddha did not intend his teachings to be useful only for those with the right lineage, the right karma, the right teacher, the right empowerment. I was taught that so often. The right social position or the right culture. Meaning, there's almost a smug attitude. It's not so prevalent now, but I noticed it, especially when I was spending time in Tibetan lineages, that Asian Buddhism is more awakened Buddhism, simply because of and I can never quite get it, but that's how it's carried, that it's a superior form of Buddhism. And of course, it's not really Buddhism at all, is it? It's something else entirely, and it deserves recognition and respect because of the establishment in our society, but it's simply not something the Buddha taught. The Buddha taught a simple and direct path of developing lasting peace and happiness, no matter what the culture is. This teaching is accessible and understandable to anyone who takes to the Dhamma wholeheartedly. In this study, there will be no analysis of concepts, nor an attempt to prove the validity of the Buddha's teachings within any tradition that developed after the Buddha's death. In other words, you can't prove that Tibetan Buddhism is good or bad, or Zen Buddhism is good or bad, or pick your Buddhism, Pure Land Buddhism. It doesn't matter. What proves the effectiveness of the Buddha's Dhamma is the effectiveness of the Buddha's Dhamma, is each and every practitioner, as we all experience here. We continue our practice because we've proven to ourselves that it's useful and skillful to do so, as the Buddha taught. I will explain terms as I understand them and as supported in the Pali Canon. I will, by necessity and informed by right speech, to show where adaptations and accommodations to the Buddha's original teachings have occurred and become generally accepted as Buddhist teachings. I intend no disrespect to any tradition, school, or Buddhist religion. I intend only for clarity and a useful Dhamma. And I learned that from reading how the Buddha, or learning how the Buddha taught. He spent nearly as much time teaching what his Dhamma wasn't as teaching what it was, because of the confusion prevalent even during his time, even during the lifetime of a Buddha. And there was always an outside influence trying to adapt and accommodate and embellish the Buddha's Dhamma, even then, just like today. The Buddha taught freedom from the delusion of stress and unhappiness. He taught that freedom or awakening can be achieved in this present lifetime. The original teachings of the Buddha are the most practical teachings for developing lasting peace and happiness still present in the world today. These teachings are presented to end all suffering in this lifetime. The purpose of this book and this course is to present the original teachings of the Buddha in a direct and useful manner. That was from the preface. From the introduction, the Buddha taught four noble truths: the truth of dukkha, or the truth of suffering, the truth of the origination of suffering, the truth of the cessation of suffering, and the truth of the path, the Eightfold Path, leading to the cessation of suffering. So these truths are often called, almost always by me, noble truths. Sometimes I call them timeless truths because of that, but it relates to timelessness. No, calling them noble truths has really two meanings. One is nobility continues from generation to generation to generation. That's the purpose of nobility in that way, or even a monarchy like there is in London. It continues. Just the fact that it is establishes itself as something that will continue. But more so than the continued effectiveness of these truths, they're just as effective today as they were 2,600 years ago, is that they rise above every other relative or abstract truth. In other words, it's true to say that I have a red Toyota Prius. I still do, by the way. And if you ever see me driving, get the hell out of the way because I can't see. But I have a red Toyota Prius. It's true, isn't it? And nobody can argue that point. And if you want to, I'm going to win the argument because I can show it to you. It's an absolute truth in that way. And it has no bearing at all on the Dhamma. It's not a noble truth. It's just a truth. I don't have a whole lot of hair. That's the truth. It's completely irrelevant to the Dhamma. It's not a noble truth. So there's truths. There's things that we can look at as it's true. Most of it is true because I say it's true. And then there's something called Four Noble Truths that are true no matter how I think or how I feel about them or about myself. If I'm miserable and hate my life and hate everybody in it, Four Noble Truths prevail. If I'm happy and I think that I got the world by the tail, nothing could be better in my life, the Four Noble Truths are still true. They're noble truths. They transcend any situation or any difficulty I can conjure up in my mind. The only way that I can access these four truths, though, is in the present moment. The Four Noble Truths are only true right here and right now. Is that clear? Yes. It's the same as saying there's no Dhamma in the past or the future. We can only develop the Dhamma or experience the reality of the Dhamma with a mind united in its body. It's really saying the same thing. Suffering. To reiterate, the Buddha's sole purpose for teaching was to bring lasting peace and happiness to all who would wholeheartedly and with right effort engage his Dhamma. The Buddha's Dhamma did not include anything that did not directly develop his stated purpose or would likely lead to further confusion. What I mean is the Buddha didn't attach things to his Dhamma that would just for the sole purpose of attracting people or making people feel good, or maybe even to distract them further with a lot of balloons or fun and games or anything like that. He taught a Dhamma and nothing else. Again, just as we experience here at Cross River Meditation Center and online, we talk about the Dhamma and we don't talk about anything else. And there's a reason for that. Because that's the only way to develop the Dhamma. It's the only way that the Buddha taught the Dhamma. The Buddha would not teach anything that further distracted an already confused mind. The Buddha understood that teaching any subject that created further confusion would have been cruel. History has shown the Buddha to be the essence of compassion informed by true wisdom. He consistently refused to answer questions on subjects such as eternalism, infinite versus finite existence, transmigration of a soul, what the self might be, is there life after death, does the soul continue after death? All these things. Remember the suttas on like Vacchagotta, the wanderer of Vacchagotta, who would have those esoteric questions for the Buddha. Where do you come from? What happens to you after you're dead? And the Buddha would just say, Vacchagotta, it's your questions that are confusing you. Let go of the questions. Again, that's why we don't talk about these things here, because they're just a distraction. We could get into long discussions about whether we believe that a soul travels from one body to the next body, or that the Dhamma could be transmitted mind to mind. That's one big part of modern Buddhism. That's all speculation. And all that those discussions or debate would be another distraction, wouldn't it? We focus on what we need to in order to develop awakening, as the Buddha teaches. Jhana meditation is the method of meditation that the Buddha taught for the 45 years of his teaching the Dhamma. Shamatha is a Pali word, or shamatha, some people say it that way, is a Pali word meaning tranquility or calm, and Vipassana is a Pali word meaning insight or to gain insight too. So Jhana meditation employs both of those. We used to call it Shamatha-Vipassana meditation before I really wanted to put the focus on what the Buddha taught, Jhana. But again, Jhana meditation develops a calm and peaceful mind that allows for true Vipassana, meaning Vipassana into the three marks of existence and really into the nature of self in relation to the world it lives in. Again, that was the culmination of that 35-week study. It's just this, just what the Buddha's teaching. Excuse me. Jhana meditation is a meditation method of gently bringing a state of tranquility and calm so that you are no longer distracted by your own thoughts. Once calm, you're able to gain insight into your own mind and insight into your own thoughts, words, and deeds that would otherwise lead to stress, stress, confusion, and unhappiness. It should be noted here that the Buddha did not intend to develop a religion or to garner worshipers. He did not create a doctrine to be followed blindly. He put aside any ideas you may have of the Buddha as a religious, supernatural, or mystical being. He wasn't. He was a human being, just like us. The Buddha was simply a human being who through his own effort and his own investigation, awakened to these Four Noble Truths. That's what Buddha means, awaken. The Buddha taught a simple and straightforward method of understanding the truth of lasting peace and happiness. The path leading to lasting peace and happiness is the Eightfold Path. Jhana meditation is one factor of that Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path can be developed by anyone, regardless of current religious practice. Some established religions have much fear based on misunderstanding regarding meditation and investigation of the nature of stress and unhappiness. Whenever I read that, I think of this, and I won't mention who the senator is that said this, and he actually passed since then, but I always think of this senator who got up on the floor of the Senate, or by the way, you can say anything you want. Nobody can hold it against you. And he was talking about yoga, but he put yoga practice and meditation together. And he's saying yoga and meditation is the work of the devil. And anytime you empty your mind, the devil's going to come in there. And again, he was a senator for about 50 years. Again, I won't mention him because it would sound like I'm putting him down. I'm not. A lot of people believe that. But even that, if the devil is so powerful that somehow he can get into my mind, why am I relying on a God that can't stop that? These are the things that confused me as a kid. And maybe I shouldn't have thought that. But the whole notion seemed ridiculous. And the Buddha didn't teach anything about emptying your mind. Ever. He taught to gain control of your mind by not being distracted by your thoughts. Thoughts are still there. We do that every time in meditation. Or when we're quiet and being mindful of the breath in our body, our thoughts are still flowing, aren't they? They have to be if we're alive. We're just not distracted by them. That's the essence of concentration. To not be distracted by our own thoughts or the things that our thoughts are attaching themselves to. The Eightfold Path can be developed by anyone seeking a more meaningful life or simply a practical way of understanding themselves on a deep and profound level. I think the two of those really go hand in hand, though. As a practice, what is learned in this course is to be practiced. There is nothing in the Four Noble Truths or the Eightfold Path that has any magical qualities of bringing instant understanding. The meditation method used in this course is most effective when developed within the framework of the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path provides the perspective, structure, and direction necessary for developing lasting peace and happiness. A basic concept of this course and jhana meditation is mindfulness, but it's refined mindfulness. Mindfulness means to recollect and to hold in mind. By developing an understanding of the causes of stress and unhappiness, we can then be mindful, or to recollect and hold in mind the practice leading to lasting happiness. The practice meaning hold in mind the Eightfold Path. The four foundations of mindfulness that we'll study next week are presented in the second week of this course. The problem of stress and unhappiness is that stress creates a constant distraction in our minds. The First Noble Truth could have nearly been accurately portrayed as saying there is distraction, as saying there is stress, because it is the preoccupation with dukkha, with getting what we want, what our sensory indulgence is making us chase after, or being distracted by avoiding what might be coming down the road next, or being distracted by our own ambivalence, meaning I'm bored in this moment, I need something to distract me. Distraction is nearly the same as dukkha. In fact, it is the distraction towards or because of dukkha that distracts us out of our body. It's why we need a meditation method that is a direct counter to that type of distraction, meaning jhana meditation. It brings concentration where there once was that distraction. Distraction is a lack of concentration and mindfulness. As human beings, we become preoccupied with grasping after that which brings pleasure, and we become preoccupied with avoiding that which is unpleasant or disappointing. With some, preoccupation rises to the level of psychosis and compulsion or addiction. By developing a tranquil mind, allowing for insight to arise, our minds become more focused and less distracted. So those last two sentences describe me perfectly. And I would bet many of you, maybe you all didn't, your compulsions didn't rise to the level of addictions. But those two qualities of mind were mine. I had those experiences. I had that mind of an addict, which is really the definition of mindfulness, isn't it? Focused on one thing. I held in mind the need for a drink or a drug constantly for years and years and years. That was basically my thought process. And then the other things I had to do to manage to get to those things. And now that same mind is not distracted by drugs or alcohol or TV. I don't know why, Kevin, when you're here, I was to say golf because it used to be, or anything else. And that is remarkable to me. I'm the one having the experience of it. But it's still remarkable that the Dhamma worked that way for me. Again, there was a long, in fact, it was a longer period of my life that I was constantly distracted. But a little bit of Dhamma brought my mind back into my body. And I find that I'm able to keep it there, no matter what's occurring. Even if I make the mistake of watching a little bit of impeachment on television. A deep and abiding mindfulness of life as life occurs is developed. I wrote this and I love the line. A deep and abiding mindfulness of life as life occurs is developed. That's what brings meaning to life. And it's the only thing that can bring meaning to life, is being mindful of our life as our life occurs. How could it be any different? How could life have any meaning at all if we're not present for it? And it's pretty simple to be present for it. All it takes is a process of retraining my mind from distraction towards concentration and refined mindfulness. And I have that practice. It's still here. It's what we're doing. We are no longer distracted by grasping and avoidance. With Dhamma practice, lasting peace and happiness can be realized. Let me just read a little bit of the introduction of the chapter onto Jhana Meditation, then we'll talk about that just briefly. The purpose of this course is to understand unhappiness and its cause. Once the cause of unhappiness is understood, it can be mindfully abandoned. Jhana meditation is a technique that you will use to develop concentration. Concentration brings recognition of how you create stress and unhappiness. Finally, concentration develops or supports the mindfulness to abandon all causes of stress and unhappiness. That's enough. We all know what Jhana meditation is. You don't need me to read that chapter because you all did. Excuse me. It just reiterates the technique that we all do in all practice, so there's no reason to go over it. The important thing about this preface and introduction and leading into Jhana meditation is just to understand the motive, understand what a human being awakened to and his motive and purpose for what he taught, and the way that we can do exactly the same thing. And I hope the preface and introduction laid that out as intended. That's what we're doing here. And now this first week, again, just going back to how I set this up, as I was writing the book, I probably moved the chapters or the weeks around a couple dozen times. And you really could start anywhere. You could even start with hindrances, was at the end of this study, because the focus there is recognize these hindrances, don't let it stop you the rest of the way. Or I could have started with dependent origination, which I always do early on our retreats to establish that. But really, as a foundational study, we should start with the foundation. And the entire Dhamma cannot be developed without right meditation, without Jhana meditation. And so that is not singularly important, but foundationally important. In other words, the other 7 factors of the Eightfold Path cannot be developed without Jhana practice. But Jhana practice cannot be developed to its culmination without the other 7 factors. So that's enough introduction to that. Let me go online first. And I always start with ladies first, but I want to go as far away from here as I can. So. Thomas, how are you?
Great.
What did you think of tonight's class?
I was reading along with you in a sample of your book that I have on Kindle.
Oh, good.
That I've had for quite a while, and I dug it out.
So do you see and understand the purpose of what the Buddha taught and why?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. That's so important. And your meditation,
As well as I'm going to understand it.
well, yeah, that's what the next 11 weeks are. I hope you can continue to join us. How was your meditation tonight?
Average. I mean, it was good, but not.
You were able to maintain the method?
Pardon?
You were able to maintain the method? Just
Yeah.
recognize.
I mean, I use qualifiers with that. I wasn't my mind wasn't wandering around, but I was not. Right at the end, when you said check the status of your mind, I wasn't crystal clear through the whole thing. But
Oh, okay.
I was able to stay on my breath pretty well.
When you found that you were caught up in your thoughts, you came back to your breathing?
Yeah.
That's the basic practice. And that last, notice the quality of your mind, relates to the fourth foundation of mindfulness. And what it's saying, excuse me, is that no matter what the quality of my mind is in this present moment, I don't need it to be any different. Why? Because it can't be any different. It's what's occurring. And simply to be at peace with what is occurring in my mind. Because of that profound understanding, I'm at peace with my mind because this is how my mind is. A way that I often say that is to be at peace with a less than peaceful mind state. And that's an awakened quality of mind. Awakening doesn't mean that you'll never have a disturbance. You simply won't need it to be any different to maintain a calm and peaceful mind.
Yeah.
I'm glad you joined us. And if you have any questions or anything, Thomas, just send me an email. Set it up.
Okay.
Great. I'm glad you joined us. Let me go to Jane. How are you tonight, Jane?
I'm fine, John.
Good,
Thank
good.
you for the teaching. I have nothing to add, but I've read that many times before, and it's always good to hear. So thank you.
Thank you for joining. Trevor, how are you tonight?
Great. Thank you so much for your teaching, John. Much appreciated. I don't really have anything else to add either. Just thought it was a very good foundation on which to build this study period. So I'm looking forward to the weeks to come.
Yeah, great. So am I. Thank you, Trevor. Let's hook up about the what you talked about earlier today.
Okay. Thank you. I'll give you a call.
Or something, but yeah. Good.
Okay. Great.
Good evening, Helen.
Good evening, John. Good evening, everyone. Happy New Year. I was at a little called Clean Slate, Clean Plate event on Sunday, and it was kind of led as a healing kind of thing. People were working through things, and so I was able to contribute a few little things that I've learned here, and just essentially accept things as they are because they are, and to not carry things beyond. Once you understand what they are, let them go. This was my contribution that I brought from here. And I mentioned the Cross River Meditation Center.
Oh, thank you.
Well,
Yeah, that's just good basic Dhamma, isn't it? That everybody can understand, whether they ever come here or learn to meditate. That's just great advice for anyone, isn't it? Thank you. Good evening, Lauren.
Good evening. Don't really have much to add, but thank you for the trip around the history and the geography that you explained. That was interesting.
It was.
Yeah.
It wasn't boring.
I won't live that down. No, it's been
Lorna
good.
was complaining Saturday about how boring his class was.
No, it's a very good introduction, and it is a very good introduction, good foundation, good groundwork for the weeks to come.
Thank you.
And thank you for all the coming back to the present moment. You can awaken in the present moment, and every time you say that, it's a reminder. It's a reminder. It's a reminder. You just got to keep tapping it in there.
Yeah.
And you've said it a lot tonight, and I think it's very appreciated.
Yeah, thank you. It's so important. That's the essence of the Buddha's Dhamma. Is his constant encouragement to come back to now. Get your body back, your mind back into your body, because this is where it's all happening. Thank you. Hello, Kevin.
Hey, John. Nice to see everybody. I don't think I have anything to add. Thank you.
Glad you're here. Hello, Ram.
John, I read your the email that you sent out with the Sumangala
Oh, a little extra.
Sutta, and it was nice to read that.
Yeah.
Here's basically a simple poor farmer
Yep.
who, by some stroke of luck or determination, takes to the Dhamma and writes a little poem how he gave up the tools of his, of his clinging, basically, to his for his livelihood, and then tells himself, I'm free of those tools, I'm free of that clinging to my life, and I'm picking up the tools of the Dhamma. I'm picking up jhana and I'm picking up mindfulness. That's what I'm doing day to day.
It's a great little poem, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. How many people read that about Sumangala? Yeah, I just kind of threw it in there as something else to read in our study of jhana. But I think next week's newsletter, there's another one called Sumangala's Mother, and she describes basically the same thing in her awakening, but her freedom was from this smelly, crooked, dusty old husband that she had. So I'll link it in next week. It won't relate to the four foundations, but it will relate to jhana. It's just a great little teaching. So, thank you. Hello, Kate. How are you? Good. Thank you.
When I read the chapters this week, I just thought it's been great to go back over it.
But you did go through it last year, didn't you?
I did, but it was when I first started.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Just coming for a year and then reading it again is it's really good. It's like a whole different perspective on it, I
Wow,
guess.
yeah.
So yeah, I'm excited to do this course again, but this time from a different level of understanding. When it was done a little bit, so that's good.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Thank you for saying that. And that's how the Dhamma is. It just, you learned what you could, you understood what you could a year ago. And now after a year's practice, you see so much more into it, isn't it? Yeah. Even something like that little poem, when you understand the Dhamma, you can see the whole Dhamma in that couple lines. Thank you. I know you're hiding back there, Tim, but how are you?
Good, good. Pretty much still been thinking about what you were saying, and also over Saturday's, previous Saturday, this fashion keeps coming up, and the importance of it during jhana meditation. You had mentioned something that caught my mind during meditation to, I don't know how you phrased it, but almost kind of, dangerous saying this, kind of like look at how you're meditating and asking yourself, how are you thinking? How are you processing? I don't know the exact, because I didn't memorize it. But during meditation, when thoughts and feelings arise, to become mindful, the right mindfulness of it is how do you process that? In other words, is this thought, it's almost like looking at a third person. You mentioned something, I think you called it, maybe I jumped ahead, but during the meditation, almost like stepping outside a little bit and seeing how you're processing it.
This is in tonight's meditation in the words that I
It
use?
relates,
It's in his first chapter.
Oh, it's in the book.
Yeah, it relates to meditation. That's why I thought if it's an appropriate thing.
No. This is Jhana week. So yeah,
So when I'm meditating, when you're in jhana meditation, and the thoughts and feelings arise, to almost, I don't want to use the word evaluate because we don't want to do that, but almost try to determine the quality of your mind at that present moment. Is this a proper way of meditating?
You mean,
I'm having a hard time articulating.
no, I
this.
think while you're meditating,
Yes, while you're meditating, while you're in meditation.
you're distracted by your thoughts, you come back to your breath and you notice a certain quality of mind,
Yes.
come back to your breath. Because that's all you, no matter, it's nothing more than just that. Then this is the quality of my mind. And if in that moment it's a distracted or disturbed quality of mind, it's just that. And especially in meditation, that's the time to train yourself to go deeper in concentration, even when your mind is distracting or grasping after you, meaning pay attention to me. I don't want to meditate right now. Come back to the sensation
Yeah,
of
these
breathing.
are like instantaneous.
Yep. And what you're doing is in a very broad way, is training your mind in that moment to accept what is occurring. Does everybody know who Jiddu Krishnamurti is?
Only from you.
Jiddu Krishnamurti was a remarkable man. Some would say awakened. I hold him back just a little bit from that. But he made quite a difference in this world. And I won't get into his whole story because I want to get to Frank quickly. But Jiddu Krishnamurti used to give these great talks. In fact, if you get a chance to listen to him, I think he's on YouTube. But he's not an awakened human being. But he did refer to the Buddha's teachings as the only thing worth developing. But Jiddu Krishnamurti used to start almost every talk with this line: "Look at the life you're living," which again seems almost too simplistic. But when you understand where he was coming from and where the Buddha's coming from, it's the essence of mindfulness, and it relates to what Tim was talking about in meditation. Look at what you're doing in meditation. Do you want it to be a concentration practice, or do you want it to be something else? If you want it to be a concentration practice, then concentrate. If you want it to be a tool for further analysis and speculation, then use your meditation that way, but it won't be jhana meditation. So it's Tim has a way of doing that, asking something that gets right to the point. In jhana meditation, we use jhana meditation. And if anything else seems to be distracting us towards something, we simply don't do it. We look at what our meditation is doing. What are we doing in our meditation? Come back to the sensation of breathing. Thank you, Tim.
And I noticed when doing that by focusing with the dispassion viewpoint, I was able to see that. Even though I'm having a hard time articulating it,
Yep.
I'm able, and I wish I could, maybe I will later. I was able to say, okay, yeah, this is, and then it's very fast.
Yeah.
And then those moments of spaciousness, and they're brief, are developing.
Yeah, that's right. And it's important to notice that. The reason why it's difficult to explain is because it really isn't, you're trying to describe an abstraction, which is very, very difficult to do within the Dhamma. I mean, it's even more difficult to try and frame it within the Dhamma, but that's all it is. It's just an abstract view that is arising from conditioned thinking that is simply to be let go of and come back to the sensation of breathing, no matter what it is. So thank you. Mary and Dave, I'm not ignoring you, but I want to get to Adam, Frank, and Eric before they run out. Let me start with Adam. Adam, how are you? Welcome to our Sangha.
Good, thank you. I just look forward to coming back and learning more.
Yeah, good. How was your meditation tonight? Were you able to maintain the method?
Sometimes.
Oh, wait, well, what I'm asking is, when you found that you were caught up in your thinking, you came back to your breath?
Yes.
That's the basic practice. And then everything else builds off of that, including what this course. I don't know if Frank has told you, on the website, there's 5 to 45 minute guided meditations just like this that you can listen to and help you with your practice. I suggest you start with 2 meditation sessions a day, and start with maybe 5 minutes at a time. The reason why I'm saying is you're better off starting with short periods of meditation consistently rather than trying to meditate for a half an hour, 45 minutes, or an hour and end up doing it once a week. You won't have much of a practice that way. But short periods of meditation twice a day, doing it every day, and you'll have a full-fledged meditation practice. And I hope you keep joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Frank, good to see you. Thanks for bringing Adam.
Oh, it's good to be here. I like the introduction. I can keep in my understanding. And when I was doing the reading, something that stood out to me was to keep the practice free of clinging or grasping, I believe you said. And like either on the cushion or off the cushion. Like I noticed that, like you try to, like I grasp after like all the positive things, and like try to like weed out the negative things, and like just not to analyze them and just let them be what they are.
Good.
I don't know, like I just made a connection in there when I was doing the reading.
Yeah, good for you, Eric. That's meditation. You know, you're deepening your concentration. So I'm glad you made it tonight. Frank, good to see you.
Good to see you too, John. And good to
Almost
be here
see
and see
you.
everybody. I really don't have much to add other than the importance of a jhana practice, period.
Yeah.
And making that commitment, because the more I do it, I just passed the 4-year anniversary of meditating every day.
Wow, that's
And
amazing.
the more I see in my meditation is, like, as my concentration deepens, I see how I create all my own suffering. It's, I don't know how the Buddha was able to leave everything behind and go out into the forest and lead a monastic life, but it seems pretty cool.
He wasn't running Stock's Bakery though.
So I mean, I have to be okay with, like, Tim was talking about this passion of the quality of your mind. I mean, and I have to be okay a lot of times with not really being happy with the quality of my mind, or satisfied, because the cause of unhappiness is wanting things to be different than what they are.
Yep.
And if I could stop myself from wanting them to be different and allow them to be what they are, I just haven't figured that out yet. Because when I'm in a spot that's responsible for making things right, it's a balance between evaluation and understanding, and letting things be the way they are. And why take somebody else's opportunity away from learning, from either bad choices or good choices, whatever they are.
Yeah.
Just a balance.
It is. Thank you. Good to see you. David, how are you?
Good, John. I'm good.
Glad you're here. Hello, Mary.
Hello, John. Hello, everybody.
See you guys. Get a safe trip back, okay?
I remember reading the book for the first time, and I read it twice in one weekend, because even though it said you're supposed to just read a little bit at a time, it was very practical wisdom. It made so much sense. Sort of something that Frank said reminded me that once you can understand that you're the cause, but not in a blaming sort of way, that you're the cause of your own suffering, then that's very empowering, because then you can be the cause of your own happiness.
That's right. That's right.
And that spoke volumes to me. It cut through a lot of clutter in my head, and it started me off on this wonderful journey. So, thank you very much. I'm happy to read through it again. And as Kate said, every time you go through it, you are learning new things, because you built on or learned from the previous year or time frame that you've grown in your practice. So. And then the other thing that Frank said too is right effort. There can't be enough applause for right effort, and the cause and effect in your practice through right effort is immediately beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that the sixth factor is there for a reason, to remind us to engage in right effort. Hi, Bonnie.
Hi, John. Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here and just following along and quietly accepting some new experiences that have deepened my awareness of the rising and letting go and how it parallels living. So the writing, reading, this is good. And also being able to make room for meditating twice a day.
Yeah. Thank you, Bonnie. Hello, Liz.
Hello, it's good to be here. I'm just looking forward to going through this again because I think every time we do, we deepen. So,
Yeah.
thank you, Jocelyn.
Me too. Thank you. Hi, Karen.
Hello. After rereading this section, I wrote down some notes, so I'll just read what I shared. I'm not great with words, so this was good writing down. So and maybe I won't cry when I speak today.
If you do, it's okay.
Practicing meditation has sent me on a journey of quieting my mind, which in turn has been calming to my whole state of being. Practice of meditating twice a day has given me the skills, awareness, and this new way of being in the moment that directly transforms my time outside of meditation into peaceful, productive, and real moments with just myself or the people around me. Sometimes I have difficulty breathing aside the thoughts that arise during meditation. Sometimes I have difficulty making time for my evening meditation. In my practice of being loving and gentle with myself, I continue to practice while seeing and feeling a deeper sense of peace overcoming.
Well, you bring me to tears.
Wow. Awakening in a single paragraph.
It's basically what that is summed up. It's really working. I'm not perfect at anything, and we're not supposed to be. We won't be. We're human. And yeah, it's, you know, you just kind of get sucked into it, and it's wild. It's like taking a moment to write and think about, wow, I wouldn't have been this peaceful these past bunch of months if it weren't for this practice. Really working.
And Karen, give yourself a lot of credit too for actually doing it. It's so important to acknowledge our own right efforts, because that's what it is. And that really was just beautiful, like what you just said.
Tonight when you were talking, it got me thinking. Therapists try to lead people on a path when they're working with somebody towards being more peaceful, right? Usually that's the goal in therapy. But they take such a completely different approach. Do have therapists ever when they go to school and learn how to help people get to a more peaceful place? Have therapists ever used this form? I don't. They're so different. They're so different.
Bonnie?
Would you like to answer that?
There are many kinds of Buddhists and there are many kinds of therapists.
So some therapists might take it, I'm sure.
So, and certain programs are like counseling programs or mindfulness-based to begin with. So they're not teaching Buddhism, but they're opening up and experiencing wellness and instead of just focusing on the negative. So, and also, you know, therapy, if they saw when somebody goes to therapy, hopefully the therapist is helping them do what they're coming to do, not what the therapist thinks that they should be doing.
Okay.
And so there are therapists who have a mindfulness practice. It may not be directly related to what the Buddha taught, but hopefully it's what the client is looking
right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Bonnie. And the other thing that your understanding might not have been so as profound as it is without your writing, correct? There's something about writing things out that are important. That's why I encourage you all to do it, to write a couple paragraphs at the end of each week, because you see things differently, you know. So thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Russ, I haven't seen you since last year. It's good to see you.
Well, I don't have a lot to add, but I'm glad to be here and I appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure to see you. Hello, Michael.
Hi, John. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm sorry. I really don't have too much to add myself. I just want to just bring up a point, okay? Just read the first chapter. And this little part, it says, ultimately, mindfulness is the non-reactive quality of an awakened mind resting peacefully as life occurs. That is the that non-reactive quality. That's the
thing.
That's the thing right there. That's the one that explains it perfectly.
What's that thing?
Because it happens like this. That reaction.
Yeah.
And obviously the whole thing here is deeper meditation, clearer the mind, the more peaceful approach to life outside, life off the cushion, so to say. And that'll develop that. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, of course, but that will develop that non-reactivity to life as it unfolds. Correct.
That's the whole.
That's
what we're doing.
Dispassion.
Yeah.
But it is a, obviously with the non-reactivity. I mean, well, with the non-reactivity, then recognition, and then restraint. But again, that's the key word in that to be non-reactive. The other thing I want to say, John, is like obviously this is the first time Julia and I are reading this book. Okay, this is a great book. From going through it, I love how so descriptive your writing is, and I also think that John, this book is basically telling us a lot about you, and the fact that you've developed this format for us to follow. Okay. With all the modern Buddhism and all the different versions of Buddhism since the time of the Buddha, and for you to bring us all back to this concentrated, view of things, I think it's just speaks to your brilliance, and to tell you the truth, I really don't think that anyone here would have anything to say anything different than that you are a true master of this craft here. So thank you so much for everything.
No eye making from that.
Yeah.
Warning.
Well,
Warning.
it's very clear to me that my unbelievable brilliance rests in the Dhamma, because I wasn't brilliant at all.
But just
until
like
I
all of
came
us,
across
you've
this.
practiced it. You've
Yeah,
practiced it. Like that's the thing. Like a therapist who's gonna.
Who's that?
Someone's already there. There's Alexis in the parking lot with the headlights on.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is it anybody here?
Thank you, me.
And the one with the dead battery?
Thank you.
Not dead yet.
Not dead yet.
But you bring up something I would appreciate it if you haven't already, and I used to ask this a lot more often. If you really enjoy the book, I would appreciate if you go on Amazon and leave a glowing review, because the more good reviews, the more people are going to read this. I make a couple of bucks, but really, we have something here that the world could use. So again, I'd appreciate any reviews. Negative reviews, keep to yourself. Hello, Julia.
Hello, John. I really have nothing to add except that what Michael said, that I'm really enjoying reading the book. It's very profound and it's simple. It makes understanding very clear. For Jhana meditation, I'm enjoying it very much.
Well, thank you for saying it. And I guess I developed kind of an author's attitude towards this book, maybe because it was the first. And it's not that I don't appreciate it, but I appreciate it more from seeing how you're actually using it, and that it's having such a useful effect. I mean, that's very pleasing. It reminded me of something I read by Richard. People remember who Richard Bach, Jonathan Livingston Seagull, and he read something. It wasn't in that book, but he said, if you really want to show an author that you appreciate what they're doing, go buy their books. And this is, and I'm not saying that you should go buy my books, but to see that it's actually working the way I intended is really everything. It really is. I was thinking about this a little earlier yesterday. That just how, from the outside, I don't know, from the outside, it looks like a pretty mundane and even boring life, meaning my life. But I couldn't imagine a more meaningful life moment by moment because of the Buddha's Dhamma and because of what I do. But and I think you all are feeling that too, that the real power of now, forget the book, and I'm not putting down Mr. Tolley, the real power of life is to be mindfully present with our life as life occurs. And then it doesn't matter what is occurring, does it? Because we're living it. We're in it. We don't need to fabricate it anymore. We don't need it to be more or less because we're in it. And this is what's occurring. That's what the Buddha's saying. That's what Tim was referring to too, by the way. What a great class. Okay. I mentioned about the retreat. There's only 3 or 4 beds left. So if you're going, please sign up. I think that's it. So next week, you're going to study the 2nd chapter on the 4 foundations of mindfulness. You'll do a little.
Is there a difference between the blue covered book and the other book cover?
Which cover you have?
This is
The blue?
blue.
Yeah, the blue one's the better one. So
Is there a difference
there is a slight difference in the chapter on dependent origination and the next chapter on not self, but it's very slight. But that being said, if you want to grab another copy, please take it.
There's a great photo on the front too. Right?
Of the new one or the old
one?
Yeah, that was I got permission from, I can't think of her name now. If I said her name, you'd know it. It's in the inside cover. And that's actually a famous picture that what's her name took. Is it in there? I do give her credit, but I'm not sure if it's right inside. Anyway, let's finish with Metta as you have your homework for next week. Yeah, that's it. Chapter 2. We'll finish with Metta as we always do. So again, take a moment to become mindful of your in-breath and your out-breath. Bring your mind back into your body. And these are the Buddha's words on Metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spread upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class tonight. Peace. Thank you, James. Thank you, Trevor. See you all soon.